But it was also really scary because I knew to have that moment of payoff, I was going to have to not really go all in on page with and be explicit with Theo's gender. And I knew there would be people who were going to be mad that I wasn't like from page one being like Theo is openly non-binary on page one. But the thing about that is that I think the reader needs to earn Theo's trust too.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here in Canada. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, I'm so excited. This is so fun and so queer and so and so happy. And I feel like I'm very like dark academia.
I love it.
You are Midsummer, as we talked
Thank
about.
you.
In the green
I was
room.
telling you backstage, I was trying to walk the line between Midsummer fun and like not too murdery Midsummer. for those who may have missed the memo, I decided the theme for this event would be Super Bloom. So if you came dressed in florals, you look great and I love it. If you didn't, you also look great and I love you too. But that is why I look this way.
But I think this should be like the rest of your tour.
I think it might be just the rest of my life.
Yeah, I like it. As Elspeth said, we're going to have time for the Q&A at the end, and I want to make sure, I know there's lots and lots of Casey fans out here, and so I want to make sure people have a chance to ask questions, so get ready, and people at the end will be circulating with mics, and I'm always very proud of the brave soul that asked the first question, get ready for the conversation. So let's talk about the pairing.
Yeah.
I don't want to give too much away for those who haven't read it, but it tells the story of two best friends turned lovers, turned estranged exes. They're named Theo and Kit, and they unexpectedly reunite on a 3-week food and wine tour of Europe. In between reckoning with their unresolved feelings for one another, they engage in a friendly hookup competition, complicated by the fact that they are both queer and often find themselves vying for the same person.
Yes.
All the while, they are eating and drinking through some of the continent's most gorgeous towns and cities. I have to say, in reading this book, the research must have been so much fun. Grueling.
Yes.
Theo is a sommelier, and Kit is a baker and pastry chef. And I'm wondering, going into it, how much did you know about food and wine and the restaurant industry, and how much did you have to learn?
So in a past life, many, many years ago, I actually went to school for journalism. And unlike some people on the stage, I do not use my degree. I did one of the things I would write about a lot. I did a lot of food reporting and a lot of going into kitchens, a lot of first looks at restaurants, a lot of like brewery tours and things like that. And I've also always just loved food and ingredients and all of the ways that those things enrich your life. And so my entry point to this book was sort of those things, but also I am a big-time hobby baker, and I have been for a long, long time. And so I kind of had some like sort of armchair expertise on baking. And so I had always wanted to write a pastry chef main character, because I'm like, I feel like as a romance writer, when you have like a niche area of expertise, you always, I find it intoxicating to read a romance writer dipping into like their day job as an astrophysicist or something to write a romance novel. And so I wanted to use that, and that was kind of my entry point. But there was a lot I had to learn. I really thought I knew a lot about drink, especially, and then got like 2 inches into the pool of wine knowledge and discovered I had so much to learn. So I took like wine classes in Manhattan, and I listened to a lot of podcasts about wine and read a lot of books about wine. And then tried really hard to write a sommelier, and then got to a point in the editing process where I was like, it's time to like let a real sommelier read this. And so I spoke to a somm at a restaurant in New York, and I had them look it over, and I was like really ready to like be praised for how good my research was. And I get like a 12-page letter back, and I was like, oh, okay. But actually, it was so helpful, and and I was on the right track for most things, but it was usually just things like, well, if you want this to be even better, to really make the wine nerds freak out, change it to this. But that was some of the research, and then I spent a lot of time actually traveling to Europe. I was very, very lucky in that I was outlining this book the summer that Red, White, and Royal Blue was in production in London, and so. Amazon was already flying me out to Europe to go to do my set visit. And I was like, oh, well, like while I'm here, thank you. Would you mind flying me back home from Rome? And so I did. I kind of rolled that trip into a research trip where I went to Paris, Florence, Rome, Barcelona, and I did a lot of the food tours that are featured in the book, like the tapas crawl and the chocolate crawl in Barcelona, and the Paris patisserie tour. I physically went on those tours, and those came before those scenes in the book, not after. And I learned so much from that, and I tasted so many things, and I just it was just absolutely one of the best experiences of my life was writing this book for a lot of reasons, creatively, but also a lot of reasons simply gastrointestinally.
And do you have like a favorite trick you learned in the process? Like, can you make a really excellent Manhattan now, or do you impress your friends when you're at a restaurant ordering wine? Like, what was your big takeaway from all of the research?
It actually feels like there's now a lot of pressure on me when I'm with my friends and ordering wine, because people are like, oh, Casey, you just wrote like 50,000 words of a Psalms POV in a book, like you should know this wine list. And I'm like, well, I do remember the name of that wine from one line in my book, and so I think it's probably good, and we should get that. But I feel like the biggest thing I've picked up, honestly, is I've become like an aficionado at Airbnb experiences. And look, I am not here to cape for Airbnb, because like we all know that they are disrupting our housing market. However, Airbnb experiences is when you can book just like a sort of independent, private experience with a local in a city. Now, make sure there's a lot of 5-star reviews before you do that. But I did a lot of those. That's how I got a pastry tour led by like just a Parisian pastry chef who does this in their spare time, and it was literally just me and her and 3 of my friends, and got like a 3-hour walking tour of like the 6th and the 7th in Paris, and then learned all about not just pastry but about going to pastry school and things like that. So I would say my biggest thing I took away was like I became the person who, like, when my friends travel, they'll be like, Casey, what should I do? And I will be like, well, let me whip out my Airbnb experience and pick the best ones for you, and they always hit.
See, I would say you are using your journalism degree.
Oh,
I would
thank
say
you.
that kind of research.
Thank
is
you.
Like,
I'm a real man on the street.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, exactly. A real person of the people.
Thank you.
One of the things that's so striking about this book is how much the book is just about pleasure. Pleasure without guilt, without shame. Pleasure not just in food and drink, but in sex, in socializing, in architecture, and being in beautiful cities. This is just such a sensual book in every way. And I know that you went to an evangelical Christian school.
I did.
Grew up in a Christian community. I spent some time in a Christian community when I was a teenager. Pleasure is not really something that one is, taught to embrace.
No.
And so I'm wondering about sort of like what it was like to write something, like what your relationship is with pleasure, and writing a book that's so much about celebrating pleasure without shame, without guilt.
Yes.
And maybe it's sort of, if there was any contrast with an upbringing that maybe said pleasure was sinful.
Oh, that's such a good question. Thank you. I think that is so absolutely in the DNA of this book. I think that, like, especially if you look at this in contrast to like my last book, which was I Kiss Sharwheeler, which is a YA about being a queer teen in an evangelical Christian school, and based not at all on my own experiences. You can kind of see the trajectory of like me going to unpack and work through all of those things and come out the other side of like, you know, when you're in your late 20s and you're finally starting to grapple with like, oh, I thought that I had escaped this experience unscathed because I didn't buy into it, but it turns out I did internalize all of this shame and all of this pressure to shrink myself and restrict myself and abstain from things in order to be, you know, virtuous. And then you become an adult and you're like, it's so interesting how that didn't affect me. And also unrelated, I feel such a tremendous amount of shame about everything around, everything that I love to do and everything that I like about myself, I'm like, feel like it's bad. However, that it's unrelated to the other things. And I think I did a lot of work when I was writing I Kiss Shar Wheeler, in my personal time, just like working through some of that stuff and kind of coming to terms with stuff and coming out the other side of that. And where it kind of left me was in this place of increased security in myself and what I owed to the world and what the world owed to me. And from that place, I was able to kind of chase indulgence more, you know? And so I really wanted this book to feel just like it was saying no to nothing. Like I wanted it to be the most of everything. I wanted it to be completely unself-conscious and completely, just committing to every bit and you know, leaving in every sumptuous detail and letting it be this sort of sensory overload in so many ways. Like you were talking about, not just I feel like it's not just in like the obvious ways like sex, but also in like the different facets of gender that it's exploring, and also in like all of the food and drink, and also in like simply the prose sometimes. To me, that's all kind of like this adult healing, like more healed response to being someone who is a lot and who wants a lot from the world and has felt so much shame about it. Is now I feel like what interests me in art is the opposite of shame, whatever that may be. I'm still figuring out what it is, but I think this book is pretty close to it.
No, I think so too, and it strikes me. And again, you know, not to get too, but it is a book. You know, your other novels are set in America.
Yeah.
This is set in Europe. Like you left home.
Yeah.
In this novel to.
Whoa! You're telling me things I didn't know.
And I'm going to charge you $150
wait.
for
Okay,
this
tell me
session.
more about myself.
But it strikes me that, you know, like Theo and Kit don't really apologize for their seeking of pleasure, but it does seem that there is something about being away, being in a different place. And again, it isn't just about sex, but it's also just about socializing, the way that what happens when you travel, where you strike up conversations with new people, where, like when you said it's a book where there is no, and that really is the mood of this book. It feels like it's a book without a no.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's magic about travel, and something I really wanted, maybe even subconsciously, to explore in this book is like, who can you be when you're going to be in a different country tomorrow, every day? Who can you be when you're in a beautiful city full of endless possibilities and no one knows who you are? And that keeps happening for weeks on end. And also, the only other tether to who you are back home is this person who you have such a complicated relationship with. How do you become each other's like kind of life raft in this experience, but also like partner in crime? And like the liminal spaces of like these little fleeting moments of city to city and person to person and lover to lover, I think is kind of where this book lives, and where like all of the muchness of it is allowed to flourish. And I find that really exciting to like, you know, kind of splash around it.
Yeah. And speaking of the muchness, this book also has a lot of sex. And I want to talk about the difficulties in writing great sex scenes, because I think that can be really challenging. And this is a very sexy, sensual book. What do you think it takes? And again, knowing that everyone has a different thing that they find interesting. You know, desire is not a universal thing, but often very specific. What does it take to write a good sex scene?
Ooh, another great question. It's tough. Like, I think one of the things it takes, and this is something I've learned as my career has gone on, one of the things it takes for me personally is all of that work I had to do to get through like the shame specifically around pleasure and around sex, that I think kind of creeps in when, like, when you're writing something sensual, or even something explicit, and it's just you in your office or you in your bedroom, and you're just like, ooh, this is fun. And then like it starts to get real because you realize one day, like, anyone I've ever met can read this and know I've thought about at least 3 specific sexual scenarios.
Right.
Which is like, that's something you really have to get over your own hangups about your own humanity and like those things about yourself in order to be able to unselfconsciously write. And nothing is worse than a self-conscious sex scene.
Right.
You really have to get out of your own head for it. And it was really tough. Like, I think the reason my adult romances have gotten more, I guess we call it spicy in the romance community, is because it's, I think, a reflective of like my own like growing confidence in my own like journey through my own life and kind of shaking off without self-consciousness. So I think that's part of it. But I think a good sex scene to me is more focused on, not maybe more focused, but just as much focused on the emotions and the reactions and like not just the stage directions, if you know what I mean, because that can get very like describing a game of Twister from memory, just very like red, like right hand green kind of, and so you do have to like, I think I think often sex is very undignified when you actually like put like words on paper. You're like, oh, this is like such a, even if you like in real life, when you actually think about like what goes on, you're like, what an undignified thing that we do. But in the moment, you're not thinking about that. Right. In the moment, you're thinking about this like intense connection that you have with a person. And you're thinking about like, I want to make you feel good, or I want to make someone happy, or I want to make them feel taken care of, or like I want this from them. And that, I think, is what drives a good sex scene more than anything, is like the push and the pull and the want and the give. And I think Theo and Kit are really fun to write because I think they both are very versatile lovers and like and can really switch between different dynamics and both get so much out of different dynamics with each other. And so to me, part of what made good sex scenes in this book was allowing them to like dip in and out of different dynamics, where one would be more dominant or one would be or they would be kind of fighting for dominance or something like that. I think allowing their personalities to guide the pitch and the tone and the rhythm of the scene makes it really sexy too, because it feels like it's part of this consummation of everything you've been working on a character level. And that's sometimes like in a book, like the satisfaction is also a narrative satisfaction of the payoff of what you've been building between them. And so keeping that in mind when you're writing a sex scene too. But also, I mean, if we can like if you really want to get into it, we could talk about like how sometimes just the choice of euphemisms that you use. Right. I feel like there's a lot of different schools of thought in romance of like what are good words. Right. And I have a lot of words I don't like that I will never use. Right. For example, impalement. I won't ever use that. But I've read it before and I was like, oh, that's really, that sounds painful.
That's a choice. That is a choice.
And and it was like, and it was in a contemporary, and I was like, that's such like a very medieval word. So I think it's always good to like maybe do another pass where you read it over like third person. Try and like give it like a week or two and read it back, because sometimes when you're in it, you're like really in it, and you're like, oh yeah, this is so hot. Like I've really done it, and then you go back and you're like, first of all, I don't even know physically in space where they are. I don't know what I'm describing. But then also you'll read it and you'll be like, oh, that actually does not sound sexy when it's not like at the end of like a 3-hour train of thought I'm having. Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess that answered your question.
Well, no. I think it's interesting because I think this comes up both in romance fiction, but also in movies, that oftentimes sex and intimacy can either be like kind of gratuitous, or it
Sure.
can reveal a lot about a character. So even
Yeah.
when you talk about like the language and the euphemisms,
Yeah.
certain characters just wouldn't use certain words. It would
Yeah.
feel very strange coming
Yes.
out of their mouth to describe something some way.
Truly, yes.
Yeah. And I think that there's also, interesting specifics in this, where at one point Theo sort of is, sort of thinking about their attraction to men and women,
Yeah.
and sort of talks about how sex with women brings out different parts of them versus sex with
Yeah.
men. And I thought that was a really interesting, very specific observation
Yeah.
about who Theo is, and it reveals a lot about,
Yeah.
like, Theo's desire reveals a lot about who Theo is as a person.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I had, one of the things I had so much fun with writing this book. I feel like across the board, I just was like, what if I did everything I like to do and thought about everything I like to think about in one book? But one of the things I really loved about writing this book was yes, I think that going back for a second to when we were talking about like shame culture around sex specifically, I think it creates this thing where we kind of divorce our sexual self from the rest of ourselves. Where like that is like after hours me, and like we don't talk about them, and like they can never see the light of day. What I love about Theo is I think they're this fully integrated person where like their sexual self is such a part of their regular everyday self, and to get to like convey these ideas that they have about gender and about attraction and about like physicality and being present, to be able to convey that in like these really physical moments was really, really satisfying to write. And I think also helped me to express things about gender that I wanted to write without having to like write a women's and gender studies essay,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And that was really fun.
Yeah. And did you feel that, because again, I think this question of, like representation, and I've heard people use the term rep sweats, when you feel
I love that.
like you get nerves because you feel like you're representing a community that doesn't always see itself represented, or often sees itself represented in ways that are, damaging, or, is it liberating for you in that the sex and intimacy and romance you explore in your fiction is queer, characters are non-binary? Is there more pressure, or is there more liberation when it comes to even sort of the norms or the traditions of romance writing?
Yeah, I think it's both. Really. First of all, I'm definitely stealing rep sweats. That's so good.
Yes,
that's brilliant. But I mean, specifically with this book, one of the things I think I was kind of writing in response to or in conversation with was sort of the trope of the slutty bisexual, which is a very problematic trope, and is kind of, for a long time, if you saw a bisexual person in fiction, it was either like the butt of a joke, or like they were going to be an absolute like menace, like sexually, and they were going to be like untrustworthy, and I was interested in this because I think that sometimes when we become interested in subverting tropes or pushing back against like stereotypes, that we can overcorrect and make the loop around to like stigmatizing people who do fall under that category of the slutty bisexual, many of whom are my dearly beloved friends. And I thought it would be really interesting. I think I've gotten praised a lot for writing good bisexual, like quote unquote good bisexual representation, but every bisexual I've written up till now was like strictly monogamous and not like super sexually, was not sexually active with anyone other than like the love interest of that book, and so I was really curious to see like, sitting, and something else I think is funny is like, while those books are described as good bisexual representation, they're almost never described as bisexual books. They're usually described as gay books, which doesn't make me mad. It just intrigues me. And I think when I sat down to write this book, I thought about like, what could I write that would have to be described as a bisexual book? Like, do they need to be having an equal distribution of gendered partners throughout the whole book? Like. And then I was like, well, that's scary, because then people are going to be like accusing me of writing slutty bisexuals. And then I was like, I actually don't care if they do, because they are. And what about it, and what about people for whom the truest expression of their sexuality or of how their gender interacts with their sexuality is having multiple partners or is being really embodied and really sexually open. Like, why should those people be left out of what is considered good representation of bisexuality or of any sexuality? Why should we have to desexualize some of us in order to be seen as like respectable parts of any community? And so, yeah, those were my rep sweats going into this. But it was really, really fun to just go all in on it and let them both be, you know, the idea of them competing for the same people, the idea of these two characters who have learned so much about themselves through other people's bodies, I think is really cool and fun to explore. And once I kind of divorced myself from you know, being worried if I was like modeling good enough bisexuality in this book, I was able to just like model fun bisexuality in a way that like really excited me. And then, yeah, of course, the gender thing of it all was also really scary because I had never done like a main character who was trans and Theo was non-binary, and I put so much thought into how I was going to put that in and how I was going to tell that story in the book. And that was the whole reason for the dual POV, was to have, you know, the first half of the book, Theo's perspective, first person, without a lot of obvious gender markers, and just kind of letting the reader choose your own adventure of like, well, what kind of gender is this person? And then like we get down to, you know, around like the 55% mark when Theo does explicitly explain on his page that they're non-binary, and it was really important to me to have that moment of when Theo comes out to Kit, and Kit like instantly changes the pronouns he's using for Theo in his head and like never looks back. To me, that moment of like, that was like a craft moment where I was able to show like the romance of being completely unconditionally accepted and like seen by someone, and how much romance there is in that. But it was also really scary because I knew to have that moment of payoff, I was going to have to not really go all in on page with and be explicit with Theo's gender. And I knew there would be people who were going to be mad that I wasn't like from page one being like Theo is openly non-binary on page one. But the thing about that is that I think the reader needs to earn Theo's trust too, as much as Kit does. I think I want the reader to fall in love with Theo before they have the chance to reject them, you know, and I want, I don't know, I put so much thought into exactly how to execute that, and hopefully it works for people. It works for me. But it was a little scary for sure, knowing that some people might not like the way that I executed it. But like, quite frankly, as a non-binary person, I am not typically going through my daily life thinking like, and then I walked outside non-binarily, and I made sure that everyone I met used the correct pronouns, even when it was an awkward and uncomfortable conversation with the barista. It's just not life. That's not life for me. And I thought it would be silly for Theo to be on an international food wine tour, reunited with their ex for the first time in 4 years, absolutely emotionally spiraling, and then like having a sidebar into like gender theory, you know. I just didn't make sense, and so that was another reason why I wrote it that way.
And is that also part of the confidence of, you know, having a number of books under your belt?
I think so.
And, you know, having, you know, feeling at a place where you've built trust with your readers, and
I think so.
And also built trust within yourself.
So much. I mean, yes, I do think that like I've hopefully earned the benefit of the doubt that like if any reader was reading this book and was like, you know, I was told that Theo's non-binary, but like Theo's not said anything about being non-binary for like 20,000 words, what's going on? I would hope that those people would like trust me enough to be like, oh, but I do see what Casey is like building into this character, and I do see like I can clock like the subtextual stuff, and I can trust that Casey is going towards something here. But I think also, yes, that comes from a place too of like, I am at a place in my life where like coming out is not the primary thing on my mind anymore, because I just kind of that ship has sailed. Here we are. We're in Canada. I'm famously gay. Like, we all know this about me. My Wikipedia page says it all. And so, yeah, so I do feel like at some level I am like, well, fuck it. You know? Can I say that at the library? I don't know.
You can say that at the library. I mean, that ship has sailed.
And that ship has sailed, baby.
Like your gayness. It's on the record now. Your debut book, I think both of your first two books, Red, White, and Royal Blue, and One Last Stop, really have been credited, and I think correctly, for opening up opportunities for a lot of other queer romance novelists, and really bringing attention to the possibilities of LGBTQ fiction. I think the story is often told like it was a fairly like it just happened.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about, because it feels like the last 5 years, the last 5 years they must have been a lot. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about what it was actually like to shop Red, White, and Royal Blue around, and was it as easy as I think some of the mythology leads us to believe?
It's so funny because I think, first of all, people don't even realize what year the book came out because it blew up on TikTok in like 2020 during the pandemic. And I have so many people who will tell me like, I picked up your first book during the pandemic, which I love and is beautiful, and I'm glad they had it at that time. But it came out in like May of 2019. And it was not like it was not like a huge noisy release. Like I went on like a mini book tour, but it was not like, basically I asked my publisher, like, can I go on book tour? And they were like, that's so funny and so cute that you would ask that. Your debut, and we don't even know if anybody's gonna buy queer romance, I mean, queer romance in the adult space was really, really new and really, really untested at the time, and publishers were really scared of it. I mean, they still are, but they at least have been convinced it can make money. So basically I was like, okay, well, here's what I'll do is if you can just book the appearances, I will get myself there, I will put myself up, I will figure it out, just get me there. And it led to this really crazy summer of 2019 where I was just like on a shoestring budget, like selling out the ripped bodice and then like sleeping on my friend's beanbag in their living room that night. Like kind of like this weird thing. My sister said, she was like, this is the part of the movie where the band's like living in the van. But like that was truly, it was like truly like a passion project. I really, I feel like not to compare myself to a minor deity, but I do feel I relate to Chapel Roan in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Where
we
like
were talking about
Chapel Roan. Where like
yes.
she was like because like I like when I had a TikTok, which I deleted because it was bad for my brain, but I followed her on there, and she was like just like one of us, and like doing like weird stuff in her bedroom, and like hustling and making it work, and then like all of a sudden she blew up overnight, and people are like, industry plant, and I'm like, you don't know how many beanbags she slept on, and I feel I really relate to that because I do think that people think, like it was an overnight success, and in many ways, I was really fortunate, like the velocity at which my publishing journey happened, and that Red, White, and Royal Blue was the first manuscript I finished and was the first one I queried, and I did find representation pretty quickly, and I found my editor pretty quickly, but those were all like, it was like one yes at every step of the way, and everyone else was like, I love this so much, this is so fun to read, there's no place for it in the market, you should age it down to YA, you should shelf it and write something more broad, with like more of a broad appeal, and then you can publish this, and it was a lot of doubt and a lot of skepticism, and a lot of like me just believing that it would work out in a way that, looking back, I'm like, that was nuts of me to do. Just like really put everything I had into something that I now see was such a long shot. But I really did believe in it, and I really did believe that like if it could find its people, it would have a strong foothold. And what I did underestimate was how broad of a category its people was. Right. And I think that is like really, every time I'm like I'm up here doing something like this. I mean, today I was at like the CBC studios, which is really cool. I was super geeking out about that. But like I have these moments where I look back and I'm like, damn, like I really am here. And this is like the fruits of the labor. And I know that sounds really corny, but like I really did, like, I felt like there was at least a year of my life at the beginning when it was like, the royalty checks had not come in yet, and we are just praying that this is going to work out. And I'm really thankful that it has the way that it has, and I'm really hopeful that like I've you know, I hate, it sounds cynical when you say it like this, but I do hope that I've proven something to the people that sign the checks in publishing, that there's an investment that's worthwhile in voices like mine that seem like you're not sure there's a place in the market for it, that sometimes that gamble can really pay off, and unfortunately money does talk, and you do have to convince them that you'll sell the books. But it is really such a gift, feels like such a gift to be able to not be sleeping on the bean bags anymore.
I know, it wasn't even a bed, but a beanbag chair.
It was, okay, I do need to say it was a really big bean bag.
Okay.
And my friends did tell me they've like since bought like a real, like a real house.
Right.
And the beanbag has gone to live at a frat house, which I do feel is where it belongs.
Oh, okay.
Like some frat guys bought it on Craigslist, and I'm like, that's perfect. And somewhere, which now makes me realize that somewhere at like USC in LA, there is a beanbag in a frat house that was part of the Casey McQuiston inaugural world tour.
I like it. I like it.
And I love that.
I know. It's like, you know, it's like your work is changing America one beanbag in a frat house at a time.
Ah, my God. I'm putting that in my author bio now. That's going on the website.
I just have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So please get ready if you want to ask questions, and folks are circulating with mics. I wanted to ask, just after writing 4 books about romance and intimacy and relationships, how has it shaped your understanding of relationships and human nature? Are you now the friend in your friend circle where people are calling you for relationship advice? Are you that person now?
No, I mean, what I am is the person who officiates everyone's weddings. I've officiated 3 weddings in the last few years.
When did you get, like, did you become ordained?
Well, actually, I got ordained, like, as a joke when I was in college. It's like, you know, it was very 2013. I was like, wouldn't it be so funny if I was a minister? And I was like, bored at my internship one day and like got ordained online, which you can do. Anyone can do it. You should go do it when you get home. And then my friends knew that I was ordained, and so when we all started like aging into getting married, my friends would start asking me, and so I officiated 3 different weddings, and that involves writing the script for the wedding. And so it is definitely a desirable trait in a wedding officiant to be a romance writer.
Right.
So I feel like that's a big way it's affected my life. But in terms of relationships, it's so interesting. I feel like people probably wouldn't want to open up to me as much because I'm going to be like, can I use that? Right. In this book, the Callums, my friend Leah did a study abroad in Amsterdam, and the guys living in the room below her in the hostel were these 2 guys named Callum. One was Irish and one was English, and so they were English Callum and Irish Callum. And that was like, they were completely different people in every other way, but I was like, can I use that? Because I couldn't think of a funnier name than Callum.
Right.
And I was like, can I use that? I'll make them Australian. Like, it'll be fine, they'll never know. But yeah, but I do think it has made me a more curious person emotionally. And I'm always looking for new material.
Yeah. I wish we had known earlier that you were an ordained minister, because there could have been.
We could have done a wedding tonight.
I know. I feel like there are some lesbians on a second date who you could have married.
The number of hands that went up.
I've been you, and I see you. So
incredible.
You could have married some U-hauling lesbians.
You know what?
Tonight.
My next book tour should be a wedding tour.
That is
Where
perfect.
I do a wedding at every stop. Wait.
That is,
okay.
hang on to that.
I'm gonna write a wedding rom-com now.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna do a wedding. Oh
love it.
shit. Okay. It's
Okay.
about to go
Okay.
crazy.
Okay.
Okay.